G'day Doggies fans, all things Bulldogs. We've got a podcast here on Buzz Rothfield and Gus Gould, or News Corp and the Bulldogs, as I like to think about it. Now, if you're in a room with three people, and those other two people, there's three people, you're one of them. The other two people are Buzz Rothfield and Gus Gould. Well, there's at least two liars in the room, at least, right? So that's a good place to start. Both these people are media personalities. Now, Gus is much more than media. We know that. He's wearing a lot of hats. It does become sometimes lines cross, I believe, and it does. Some fans aren't happy, especially Bulldogs fans. He has a lot of detractors within Canterbury and everywhere else. But one thing about him is he doesn't really lose much sleep. Not that he sleeps. He doesn't lose much. He doesn't seem affected at all about what people think of him. He just does what he believes needs to be done at the time. He takes risks. He makes mistakes. And sometimes he admits those mistakes by trying to correct them. But he also does a lot of good. And one thing you never hear Buzz Rothfield talk about is the amount of good that Gus Gould does whenever he's asked. When anyone puts up their hand and says they need help, Gus always answers the call. Now, I've myself have thought many times he needs to get off Twitter. But the amount of requests he gets on Twitter to help, which costs not only himself, but other people time and money. And I know this, recently one of the guys that one of our fans is having a really tough time, and I've reached out, and a couple of us reached out to help, and we've raised some money, and the club's helped him. But there's players in the club who are continually trying to help this guy as well, and he's not the only one. There's others. People don't hear about these good stories all the time. It's all about the crap. The divide and conquer stuff. So what we're going to talk about is that Tino pub incident. I'll talk about the article, NRL 360 last Monday, 100% footy last Monday with Gus's response, then NRL 360 on the Tuesday and how the tune completely changed, resulting in what I believe needs to be sorted out, and that's Buzz Rothfield then saying that we are salary cap cheats, trying to rort the salary cap again. You don't go there with Canterbury fans. We already get tarnished with so much. There's News Corp. Look, if there's a criminal out there and there's a picture of him, they're hoping to find a picture in a Bulldogs jersey. David Clemmer last year for the Knights, when all that stuff happened, the article said the former Bulldog, they didn't call him a Newcastle Knights player, and the picture of him in the article, he had a Canterbury-Bankstown jersey on. Right? This is when he did something on the field as a Newcastle Knight, and he'd been there for 3 years. Like, you just can't imagine how openly corrupt and biased that is towards Canterbury. It's wrong. And it's wrong to David Clemmer as well. He was a proud Newcastle Knight at the time, right? But it's important to get the timelines of this and just show how the tune changed. Now, the media is never going to stop doing what they do. This isn't what this is about. As long as there's advertisers who are going to pay money to media organisations, who then essentially pay the NRL, who then pay the players. Okay? That's what all the TV rights money is, what pays for every player's salary. The NRL gives the full salary cap to every club to make sure the players get paid. Which is why a lot of players don't really act out against the media. They really don't. They could, but they don't. Same as player managers and clubs don't really say as much as they could or want to, because at the end of the day, they utilise the media just as much to move players on, to create certain things that happen. they all are at fault at some point for creating a situation or a scenario which gives them an advantage, or that's the intent, whether it's for the player manager themselves, for the player, or for the club. Okay, they all do it. It's just the nature of the game, just the way it's become. But let's have a look. Buzz Rothfield, he's part of a declining... Newspapers have been in decline for a long time. And he's part of that. So, essentially, his stats are going down when it comes to newspapers and his articles. But his share of the market still remains quite good when there's a lot of different ways for people to get their footy fix, to get their sport news and that sort of stuff. And he creates discussion points, and sometimes it's as if he writes his article in the moment of how he's feeling, and sometimes he gets it wrong. And now he's on Twitter as well, which means he makes other mistakes. Just like Gus comes out and says stuff off the cuff. And I don't mind those characteristics in people because it shows that they've got some realness to them. But do not let that persuade you from the truth. The truth is, he will say and do whatever he's got to do to satisfy his ego, as well as getting clicks for his mastheads, and that's what he does. So what has he got wrong recently? Well, we all know about the drones, which made him look pretty bloody stupid. But even in apologising, he managed to have another crack at Gus about some stuff which, you know, it's all a play on words. And so often Buzz Rothfield will say things, and Gus will do it as well, in such a way which he's not technically lying, but he's not telling the truth either. Yet he always acts like he's the victim in it all, and he's the messenger. They've had a lot of run-ins over a long time, and he believes he's the only one holding Gus Gould to account. I just want to know who's holding Buzz Rothfield to account, and I'm hoping I can do so a little bit here for the few people who listen. Very grateful, by the way. So what has he got wrong? He's got wrong the drones. Just on this year, he said Kyle Flanagan, the week after he was dropped, he'll be making a mid-season transfer to Manly, and that it was a done deal. He said it was done. Did not happen. He talked to Ben Hunt. We talk about the Ben Hunt scenario. Now, they just kept relating Canterbury to it because everyone knows that Canterbury have needed a halfback. And that Gus had a meeting with him last year. Now, Anthony Griffin, they've talked about him being sacked all season. And all of these stories, you've got to understand how they flowchart this stuff, right? And they try and link as many stories together because one story often feeds into another. And it's like a big, it's like a whole sequence, a whole series of books about it, right? You got chapter 1, chapter 2 in the whole saga. So Anthony Griffin, Ben Hunt creates a headline by getting out there and saying, well, he doesn't really want to start again. And he believes the team he's got's the one who can take him there. Like, he's saying all the right things about his coach, about his club. And he wants to win. He hasn't won a grand final. So as soon as Anthony Griffin's sacked, Ben Hunt's coming to Canterbury, according to Phil Gould. To Buzz Rothfield. As soon as, then all of a sudden Hunt's like, well, I just want to go back to Queensland. So he'll be going to the Titans now, it looks like. But he was also going to the Broncos, apparently, according to Buzz. The fact of the matter is, he's got that wrong. He's tried to make out that Canterbury were desperate to get him. This was last year before he'd even re-signed. As far as I was aware, there was no other meetings that took place or that was seen to have been taken place. So it's all conjecture. Then we have the situation around Jayden Sullivan, who we were trying to get, and apparently it was a done deal last year, and he asked for a release and was rejected, then decided he was going to stay, which I think was the right thing to do, to stay with Ben Hunt at that club and develop with a mentor there. Now, Ben Hunt's definitely on the way out, is what everyone's saying. Dragons are trying to keep him with his contract, but they reckon he'll be going to the Titans next year. So what does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means Buzz Rothfield could come out the day after we signed Toby Sexton, and bring him to the Bulldogs. What's he say? In 2024, Jayden Sullivan will be playing for Canterbury. Now, the reason that the Sullivan story emerged was because he said that he was told he'd be taken over from, say, 2023 or 2024, and that Ben Hunt, that he wanted Ben Hunt gone, basically. That Ben Hunt would be gone and he would be taking over because he wanted to play halfback and all this sort of stuff. And that's why he wanted a release, because they had decided to keep Hunt, who Canterbury were looking at the time as well. Hunt stays, Sullivan ends up staying. Now Hunt's going, and now they're saying Sullivan's going to go as well, which just didn't make sense after we just signed Toby Sexton. And what's the next point? Then the next article after that, Flanagan will be going to the Dragons to play halfback, and Sullivan will be going to the Bulldogs when we've just got Toby Sexton. Why would so Shane Flanagan, how would he get away with letting a local junior go in young Sullivan, who is very green and needs time? Why would they let him go and bring in Kyle Flanagan to play with his dad? Like, nepotism or whatever the word is just going to be sprouted everywhere. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Kyle has a bad reputation, unfortunately. He's a fighter. He's won some hearts and minds with his tackling. And let's talk about Kyle Flanagan and News Corp. Round 4 last year, when he's named to play Penrith for round 5. Paul Crawley says that Canterbury are trying to torture, humiliate and embarrass Kyle Flanagan by bringing him in against Penrith. Since that point, Kyle actually won the hearts and minds of a lot of fans with his efforts in defence. He had a couple of good games in attack. It's still been a worry for a lot of fans, but, you know, he's trying his best, is what most people can see. He still has a lot of detractors, but nowhere near as many as he had. The way he fought to get himself back. Now, Gus tried to take a lot of bullets on that situation and take the heat off Barrett. Barrett ends up resigning. Gus said he'll be there for years, and, you know, and 2 or 3 weeks later, he's resigned. We lost to Canberra and Newcastle in tight games. But what happens after 4 rounds this year? Paul Crawley, the same journalist who attacked Canterbury and said we were trying to humiliate and embarrass Kyle Flanagan, and I did it, and I did an episode on this. He says we need to bring in Carl Oluwapu after 4 rounds. 2 wins, 2 losses at the time. Just lost the game by 2 points to the Warriors. Our forward pack was being dominated for most of the match. Our halves had barely any room. We led for most of the match. It was the best start to a season in a very long time. The week later, we go to 3 wins, 2 losses after a comeback victory against North Queensland, which was fantastic. But apparently after that 4th round, Crawley's saying we had to get rid of Kyle Flanagan and bring in Reynolds or Oluwapu. Oluwapu, who had in the paper, had so many positive reviews of his games. And I watched his games, and you know what? I think the kid's got a lot of talent. But I also think he's a kid. I love the way he hits in his tackles. But I never saw a halfback there. But that brings us back to Arthur Laundy. There was also an article that same week that Arthur Laundy was mentoring Carlo Luapu. And the reports are, or the rumours are, that he paid for the $500,000 transfer fee. But that's just media. Like, we don't know how much we paid Broncos. I bet you it wasn't that much. But we don't know. So let's talk about Arthur Laundy and Carlo Luapu there. Because this brings us back to Buzz, who says that he knows Arthur Laundy well. One thing we know about Arthur is that he likes to tell people what he's doing or wants to do, and how he's helping or wants to help. I've heard numerous rumours which have been shared from Arthur Laundy, is where the source was. Some done deals, right, on some things which don't seem logical. And the only thing to really come through at the moment is that he said that Carl, and I'm not going to say what they all are, and they didn't come directly from him, but these are rumours, and I think rumours are crap, but I'll just talk about this one. He's watching Manly. He's speaking to some fans of Canterbury. And apparently he's sitting there telling those fans, after Kyle Flanagan just got sin-binned for 10 minutes and the score blew out, that Carlo Luapu will be playing halfback for Canterbury by round 10, replacing Kyle Flanagan. Now, that's the type of person he is. Like, to even think, and it ends up turning out after 8 rounds, after Kyle actually had a pretty good game moving from halfback to 5'8", I thought he played all right and set up some good tries against the Sharks. For him to be essentially targeted and dropped or scapegoated, but for Arthur Laundy to have suggested that earlier in the season, it's almost like a premeditated thing, right? I believe it's completely coincidental as far as the replacement of Kyle Flanagan. But it can show you how Arthur Laundy does like to talk. He does like to say things, right? And Buzz Rothfield knows him and has manipulated him to be able to come to a point where he can attack Canterbury and attack our club and attack Gus Gould. And that's the point I'm making here. So let's talk about the timeline. On the Monday, the articles are out there. The articles were that Canterbury, Arthur Laundy and Canterbury were trying to look into the NRL to see if they could offer Tino Fa'asuamaleaui a share in a pub on top of his $1 million salary cap as a third-party agreement to try and entice him to the Bulldogs. All right? Now, with that being the case, he then also reports that the NRL had knocked it back. And then on his Monday article, which was the big wrap-up of it all, he talked about how he spoke to Arthur Laundy, which happened on the Sunday apparently, and that Arthur was prepared to put up the investment opportunity. It was similar as the BETR or Better bookmaking agency, which is Melbourne players had bought into. Now, one thing I could say, you don't have to really guarantee an investment win on that. That's they're going to get a return on their investment. You just know it. Being a huge bookmaker that's doing a lot of advertising, they're just naturally going to get clients, and people are going to move there. And all bookmakers are making money pretty much. So, especially the online ones, it's lucrative. So he's a billionaire pub baron, and Buzz has obviously got him talking. And Buzz would be like, "Oh, what if it doesn't work out? How can you guarantee it? And Arthur would just be like, I'll give them their money back. You know, I'll make sure they get their guarantee. Now, to me, that's just Buzz Rothfield, who says he knows Arthur Laundy, just sitting there manipulating the situation, knows this guy runs his mouth. And the whole fact of the matter was, they come on NRL 360 on the Monday, and they talk about how it's great that Arthur's trying to get involved. How he said the NRL knocked it back because he said he would guarantee it and all this sort of stuff. And they're like, oh, so if he was just Uncle Nick or whatever, so Braves basically sat there and said, if he was Uncle Nick, they just get it done. They wouldn't talk about it. Which just highlights, like, there's this undermined, it's okay to breach things if you don't talk about it, is what I get from that. Knowing that Munster, his client, is the one who's got the better investment, and not just the only one at the Storm with that, through Trippett. But then for him to say all that, and then Brent Reid saying it's great that he wants to get involved, mate, he just needs to go about it the right way, you know. But the NRL's knocked it on the head. So Gus Gould comes out on 100% footy, and he's asked about it, and he said Arthur rang him upset, and I believe that did actually happen. I think Arthur realised he probably said too much. He probably had a couple of drinks. I don't know if he drinks. I'd say he does. Just an assumption. And he's basically let his mouth flap a little bit too much about what he'd like to do, because that's all hypothetical. No offer was made. Now, the player manager said that they hadn't spoken to anyone, but they were arranging meetings to speak with players and speak with Canterbury and that after the Origin. Now, technically, it could have been Peter Sharp who organised all that, and Gus, and then they go and speak to players, and then they come to Gus and put it forward to him, and then he goes to the board and gets it ratified. And then they speak to the coach and everything about it first. That's how it works. Gus isn't the only one trying to do recruitment. He's got a few people that go about that sort of stuff, right? So he's technically could be telling the truth that he had not met Tino or his manager, and that Tino wouldn't be at the Bulldogs. He might have been telling the truth about that. But even if he wasn't, who cares? The fact of the matter is, Craig Laundy did talk about it a lot earlier, because that was also mentioned by Buzz. So you see where their stories line up. So there was a discussion about a way that they could provide a third-party type of agreement. The difference is he's now he's a sponsor of the club, and it's sort of very quirky ground. Doesn't change the fact that the Melbourne Storm have 10 times the amount of third-party agreements than what Canterbury do. And it seems to be okay, because we need to constantly, buckle down in that area and keep good players there. It's ridiculous. Well, that's my take on it. But to get this sorted, he then had a banter with Carianis and they made out like the next day like it was a huge blow up, and there was all these articles about it. So what happens on the Tuesday? Because Gus has come out and said he's basically making things up, and they're just making it up to divide the club. What does Buzz Rothfield come out and say? That he holds Gus Gould to account, and now he's saying it was just an elaborate. He said that Arthur called him back and got him to remove one of the quotes that he gave, but he approved everything that was there. I can guarantee you it wouldn't have, and if it was done in 10 minutes, I can guarantee you it wouldn't have just been rattled off every quote, everything that had been written and taken down. I can tell you that now. That would take a lot longer. It would have been done in a really sort of, yeah, mate, it's all right. Yeah, I won't talk about that. Don't worry. We're just going to talk about this and how you want to help. You know, it would have been done in a completely where mates taking care of each other type of situation. I can tell you that now. That's how they do it, these guys. They're just like salespeople who will agree with you on every single subject you talk about just to get a sale. Relate to you any way they can. It's the same thing. And then what happens? Now it's an elaborate attempt to rort the salary cap. The Dogs are suddenly salary cap cheats. People who don't pay attention think, oh, well, the Dogs are linked to every player. Oh, the Dogs they've spent all this money, when we really haven't. We've got plenty of money available. We sacrificed for 5 years so that we could have some money. And Buzz Rothfield knows that. News Corp knows that. This was an elaborate attempt by Buzz Rothfield and his ego to try and throw some mud at Canterbury, knowing that parts of it would stick even though it was complete bullshit. And it has to be called out. And it should never happen. It shouldn't be allowed to happen. Now, I know people can say, oh, I'm giving him an avenue by talking about him. But this is just a warning to fans not to utilise Buzz Rothfield when you're attacking Gus Gould for decisions. Don't use anything that Buzz Rothfield has said about him. You know, Jake Averillo leaving our club. I hold Gus Gould accountable to that. I hold previous coaches accountable to that. The board for ratifying, for not ratifying an offer for him, to not working harder to keep this local junior. They can wear that. Did he lie about Trent Barrett? We don't know. Trent apparently resigned. But what percentage of the fan base wanted to keep Trent Barrett? It's just the way it was. We hired a rookie coach. People wanted Mick Potter. Mick Potter's still there, helping a rookie coach. And I think he preferred that. He didn't say he was begging for the job when he come back. He come back to do it as a favour. It started to grow on him. He started to enjoy it. He got a little bit of success at the end. But he never actually screamed up and down that he wanted the job. So, and he's still part of the coaching team that's struggling, that's on 6 wins and has a chance to win another 4 or 5 games. Anyway, guys, they've got a lot wrong, but it's absolutely deplorable for Buzz Rothfield and News Corp to sit there and say that we were trying to rort the salary cap after the very day before in the article all stated timelines suggesting that that Arthur was completely open about it, just trying to help, and it was him and his ideas, right? About how he could help Canterbury get players to our club without, and compete with the salary cap, because we have to pay more. It was completely encouraged the day before. The day later, because Buzz's ego got hurt, right? He just decides to throw the toys out of the cot and attack our club yet again. And it's just not on. It's disgraceful. And it needs to stop. They're always going to continue to divide and conquer. They're always going to continue along these lines. But Canterbury fans just need to know to take anything this guy says about Canterbury, they've got to take it with a grain of salt. Doesn't matter what he gets right, because he's going to get so much wrong. Just remember the drones. Remember Ben Hunt. Remember Kyle Flanagan had signed with Manly this year. Remember that, Jaden Sullivan's... That still may happen, but why would Canterbury go and sign Jaden Sullivan? Why would Jaden Sullivan want to leave St George after he's basically had his wish granted that Ben Hunt's leaving? which was what it was all about last year, why would they immediately tie us back to Jaden Sullivan? It just didn't make sense. I think someone's lost his marbles. Yeah, and many people know that already, but anyway, I've had a bit of a talk about this, but that's how I deciphered it, and that's what I thought about it. Anyway, guys, thanks for listening. We'll have the All Things Bulldogs podcast next week. Not sure who'll be a guest on next week, but appreciate all your interaction and support, and like and subscribe and all that sort of stuff. Thanks, guys. Take care.